The church abuse scandal in the news again. The Archdiocese of New York has just released the names of 120 clergy members who have been credibly accused of sexual abuse. New York, just the latest diocese to provide information that in the wake of the Pennsylvania grand jury investigation that showed the horrific scale of this scandal. In just that state alone, 300 priests and more than 1,000 victims were identified. And joining me now is the head of the largest support group for victims in this country. Zach Heiner is executive director of SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. Zach, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich. Happy to be here.
Well, let's get into the significance of the names that were released. And I know I was dealing with Marcy Hamilton, who was integral in the Pennsylvania case. She said that Dolan was sitting on a treasure trove of information, and he was being compelled to by court. Other states decided to get ahead of it. That didn't take place in New York. Do you believe that this is just basically the beginning and that there's substantive additional information that the New York Archdiocese has that they didn't release yesterday, or is this the totality of what we're going to see?
You know, I think it's very likely that there will be more names that are discovered and added to this list as time goes on, as more survivors, are compelled to come forward, as typically happens following the release of these lists. And in terms of, usable information, we know that there's a lot left off of this list that's important. The list released by the Archdiocese of New York only includes the names, years of ordination, and current status of priests that were accused, which is good information, but not really enough for what we would consider a complete list. I mean, at a minimum, the work histories of these men should be added to that list so that the communities in which they served know to look within their own ranks for survivors of abuse. So that's just one small example of more information that should be added and has been by other dioceses around the country.
Zach, for a lot of people, they see numbers. They've seen this story before in the Archdiocese, or the parts of the country will change. But put a human face on this. The one thing that struck me with all of this, and I'm practicing Catholic here, but is the lives that were destroyed, not just the youth that was stolen all too often from these kids by these predators, but that it haunted them for the balance of their lives. And, it wasn't a moment in time. It was so much more than that. Can you help the audience understand where they didn't just steal childhoods, they stole in many cases entire lives?
Right. And I mean, what we know, the realities about sexual violence and the science on sexual violence is clear. This is an adverse childhood experience that affects people in many ways that aren't really obvious. We know that survivors of child sexual abuse often have issues with physical and mental health issues. They're at a higher risk for things like cancer or heart disease, as well as a higher risk for things like mental health issues, depression, as well as societal issues such as poverty or housing insecurity. So the experiencing of this kind of adverse effect early on in life really does fundamentally affect the rest of your life. And we know in the United States, the average age of an abuse survivor, clergy abuse survivor coming forward is 52. So if you think about all of those ways, those negative ways that the abuse has affected these people over their entire lives, and then they really don't feel comfortable or able to come forward until, again, on average, they're 50, is just a lifetime of pain and suffering, and often done in silence and alone.
And the one thing at least we've seen, and obviously we have to process the information that's released, but the one thing we've seen as patterns, Zach, in other archdioceses has been these were known predators within the hierarchy very often. And they were moved to other parishes. They were allowed to, where their hush money payments were put to the side here to try and keep quiet. They put other children at risk by allowing these men to still wear the collar and still practice mass and still be around altar boys and still do all the things that they did. To me, as horrific as the acts were, it was the abetment of it that was just as bad a crime as even the crime itself.
Yeah, well said. I think that when you look at it in an individual case, any abuse is horrific. But as you said, the moving and the shifting of these priests and the minimizing of allegations against them allowed them in many cases to abuse more than one person. So when you talk to survivors, you'll often hear that they're very happy when they see things like these lists posted publicly, because it might encourage others who are abused by that person to come forward, but mostly because it makes sure that they're known to the public and known to the community so that they won't be able to abuse someone else ever again.
Where are we with accountability, Zach? And I ask that because the Pope has said some dramatic statements, never again. He's talking about the stain on the church that it was. He's offered apologia. But is it just words? Has enough systemic change happened that this can't happen again? Let's remind everyone, it was through the state houses that we changed the age at which you can still bring a suit here. This didn't happen through the church itself. How much faith should we have, for lack of a better word, that the church really gets it and this will not happen again?
I think that the church hierarchy is very, very far behind the rest of the public when it comes to the issue of sexual abuse and assault. And I think that, as we've seen a lot of apologies, as you said, and we've seen a few small changes here and there, but nothing that really drills down to the very bottom of this issue. But fortunately, we have been heartened to see, as you alluded to, the actions from legislatures and secular elected officials like AG Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. And I think that we're getting to accountability and transparency through our government and through the people that we've elected to figure these issues out for us. In the wake of AG Shapiro's investigation in Pennsylvania, there have been 18 more investigations that have cropped up in states around the country since then. And we fully expect that to go all the way to 50, because, as I said, people here in the trenches, if you will, in the pews, are really angry and tired of hearing about this and just want to get to the bottom of it. And I think that the church hierarchy is still stuck in a little bit of the institutional protection mode.
So some progress, but still not the transparency, long overdue. Zach, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rich.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here on RFL. We'll be right back.